Okay, this short video is going to really help you make sense of and produce the best possible answer to this 10-mark exam question here that you see at the top. Obviously the question itself is all based around the topic of altitude that we've been looking at and its effect on the respiratory system, but you've also got to look at this question about how altitude affects different intensities of activity or exercise. Don't just get drawn into thinking you've got to talk about the benefits of altitude when you return to sea level. That comes at the end. So first of all, the question's really broken down into three main parts. The first part to do with this bit about what we call pre-acclimatisation. Now that's linked in to do what effect does altitude have on the respiratory system. Before we talk about activity, what effects it having upon the respiratory system to start with. As you can see from this little graph that I've put in here, the main thing you've got to look at is the effect of altitude upon the partial pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere. There isn't less oxygen in the atmosphere, there's the same percentage, around 20% of the atmosphere at altitude and at sea level is made up of oxygen. The difference is the major decrease that you see in partial pressure of oxygen. Now what happens there is when you get a decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen at altitude, that results in a decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen that the body can take in. So what I want you to think about there is if you've got a decreased amount of oxygen that you take into the body, there'll be a decreased partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli. What effect's that going to have upon the diffusion gradient? When you have a change in the diffusion gradient and the diffusion gradient becomes less steep, remember that results in a less efficient gaseous exchange and less oxygen getting transported around the body. And that's key in this first part. Secondly, here we've got to look at the pre-acclimatisation part of where we've got the influence of altitude on physical activity. Two parts to this. We've got to look at all what we call sub-maximal activities, in other words, how does it affect an aerobic performer? And then maximal intensity activities, how does it affect an anaerobic performer? And we're all agreed that it has a negative effect on an aerobic performer, but I want you to tell me why. Why would an aerobic performer, when you take them and put them in altitude, why would their performance decrease because of what happens at altitude? Go back to what you said in the first part about the partial pressure of oxygen. Why would that result in a negative performance? Can you talk to me about things like increase in lactic acid, inability to disperse lactic acid within the body, perhaps not being able to train at the intensity or work at the intensity for as long because of this issue with the partial pressure of oxygen. Next, with an anaerobic performer, what you find is that the effect is mixed. With some anaerobic activities, they're affected in a positive way. For instance, throwing events, jumping events, some sprinting events. Because the air is actually thinner and the atmospheric pressure is lower, objects, including athletes, over short distances can travel through the air a lot quicker. However, with some activities, anaerobic, like 200 metres, 400 metres or even an 800 metre events, because of the fact that some of those events build up a presence of lactic acid in the body, those performances deteriorate. All right? But, again, can you tell me why? Final part of this question is to do with the post-acclimatisation. It's positive, so when they return to sea level, the effect of being at altitude is a positive one, but can you tell me why? I've given you some little pictures on here to try and help you and try to push you down the direction of listing some of the positive effects of working at altitude. There is a positive effect upon the production of red blood cells. There's a positive effect upon the respiratory system in terms of lung volume increasing. Positive effect upon EPO. Now EPO, though we've heard about it in sport being a drug, it's actually a natural hormone found in the body that is linked with the body producing more red blood cells, which ultimately increases the oxygen carrying capacity. Now, you spend some time at altitude and then come down to sea level, the body adapts from being at altitude and actually produces or releases more EPO into the body, which in turn produces more red blood cells. And the final part of it, can you make some consideration and comparison between when they return to sea level about the impact of those submaximal aerobic activities versus the maximal intensity anaerobic ones? Often what you find is with the anaerobic ones, basically the performance are unaffected. However, you can get some maximal intensity ones where you do get some improvement because of the body's ability now to remove lactic acid a lot more efficiently because it's using oxygen better. Okay? Good luck.